everyone. My name is Carolyn Hinds, film critic and journalist, and this is one of my interviews for KCrush American Magazine. And today I am joined by filmmaker Nedda Sarshar to talk about her short film Unibrow, which is showing at the 2024 ShortShorts ShortShorts Film Festival and Asia, and which it takes place in Japan. And I'm very happy to be joined by Nedda to talk to her because we're here in Toronto, and it's not very often I get to interview filmmakers here in Canada. Many of my interviews are usually online, so I'm very happy to have Nedda to join me.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Right, so Unibrow is a short film, and it's about this young Iranian-Canadian girl who's going to a private school in North Richmond Hill area?
Up for interpretation, but yeah.
So she's Iranian-Canadian, and she would be what we would consider second generation Iranian-Canadian, and her parents came over from Iran after the war in Iran, and it's about her struggling with her identity, her cultural identity, with regards to Unibrow. And if you're not familiar, in many Middle Eastern communities and cultures, women having unibrow is kind of like taken as a sign of beauty. It's a very interesting beauty standard, which I love, and the film explores that and how the character Layla is kind of struggling with wanting to fit in and conform to European beauty standards, and then she meets another young student who kind of like changes her perspective on that. But I really love the film, and I love how the film uses a unibrow, something that you can't ignore and can't mistake. You know, like if it's there, it's there. To really talk about beauty standards, especially from a young female perspective. So Nedda, I read some of your work on your website, because Nedda is also a poet and a writer and an author, and some of your stories kind of deal with the idea of unibrows being a cultural. I think like there was a story I read with your cousin. She called it camouflage, where like you remove the unibrow, and she called it kind of like a cultural camouflage.
Oh my gosh!
So, talk to me about you making this film and using the unibrow as the idea of discussing beauty standards.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, and thank you for being so thorough and prepped and knowing so much about like the synopsis and like the story and my other work. But I think like as you said, like, you know, like a unibrow or any kind of like, I think like facial difference or like any kind of like physical difference is something that like really cannot be avoided, but it's also one that is often rooted in very like cultural and like heritage oriented kind of like conversations. And so growing up, like as like a second generation Iranian person, it was often those sort of like physical reminders that made it very difficult for me to just like be able to kind of like completely blend in. And I think a lot of like people like myself who in many ways are very like white passing, oftentimes like really like are in this like unique like position of feeling like there's like one or two things that like if I just get rid of this, I would be completely okay, which is of course never the case. And is of course like, you know, like rooted very much in like kind of like wanting to, I think like erase and very like assimilate towards like more like predominantly white environments. And so growing up, these were like all these themes and like you know, like I think like identity struggles that I really struggled with, and it felt like in making Unibrow, I was like, I really want to make a film that I needed to hear, or like a story that I needed to hear when I was that age.
Right, because the thing is like you mentioned that sometimes you say, okay, if I tweak this one thing, it'll be fine, but then you don't stop there.
No,
and for many women who talk about getting like plastic surgery, they'll start with one thing, maybe like just getting rhinoplasty, you know, but then they'll be like, oh wait, I need to fix the rest of my face to go with my new nose, so then they might get like do something to their chin or their jawbone and get facelifts, and then you do like fillers now is this really popular thing, and it like ages people, and it's like you no longer look like you know. But the thing with the unibrow is it seems like just such a simple thing where you just shave. You just shave it or pluck it or wax it, or like in Melissa cultures you do threading. I've done threading once. It's very effective, but I actually just shave my eyebrows myself, and I only do like underneath here and there. And one of the reasons I do my eyebrows is because one of my eyebrows is more arched than the other one.
You have really beautiful eyebrows.
Thank you.
Whatever you're doing, it's working.
But I started doing my eyebrows from very young. In secondary school, me and my friends, because I went to an all-girls school, at lunchtime, we'd be doing here, the classroom turned into like a mini beauty salon.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right? So we'd be doing like, I had my ears pierced when I was a baby, but I pierced my second hole at school with a needle and an ice block, and I do not recommend that. It hurts.
Oh my gosh, like in the Parent Trap.
Yeah.
No.
So because it was a very big trend in Barbados at that time for get like a second or a third piercing. And I did it at school, but like we were doing these kind of things, but like for girls we think, oh, this is something simple, but it's like you're doing it because you want to fit in.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's interesting because like I think like when the first drafts of the story, I was like, okay, it's wrong that she doesn't like her unibrow.
Yeah.
So let me she by the end of the film in the first draft was like, no, actually I'm going to keep my unibrow and that's completely fine. And then I actually had a conversation with a few other Iranian women in my life, and because plastic surgery is like something that's like incredibly prominent in Iran. And it's interesting because like here, like in the West, growing up as Irani, like I really wanted to change my appearance to like fit in with like my like white peers, or like to like just like not feel very like ethnic or like anything like that. But like in Iran itself, like plastic surgery becomes I think like in many ways like a tool of like resistance against like a government that is hyper fixated and over polices women's looks. And so it's just to me it like the more kind of like transparent and honest conversation is that like it's true that like I think like like as like girls and like women from like a very young age, often before we were even able to kind of like really like consciously be able to give a consent, we are constantly being commented on about our like features and like over like analyzed and like over fixated on it. At the same time, I think that like tools like threading and plastic surgery and like things like that can really be a means of like reclaiming your looks and modifying them as you sort of like feel like you need to in order to sort of like present yourself like authentically. So I it's always just like this like to me like I'm kind of like I'm very fascinated about how like spaces like salons can be like like spaces where like maybe like on like the outside looking in you're kind of like, well, these are people who are just like overly obsessed with their looks, but I think underneath that is actually a very like political space that really like forms community and culture and dialogue, and I'm so like endlessly fascinated.
And it's true, because the thing is like beauty is a political concept. Especially for us as women of color and coming from like ethnic communities, we're influenced so much by white supremacy and white ideas of beauty and beauty standards, especially, and standards that have changed over time. And the irony is like people with like our body type would have been considered extremely desirable in like the 1700s, 1600s, 1800s, go early up into the 19th century. But then like our bodies started to become more of a commodity about selling products, like using, of course you gotta talk, if you talk about like Gap jeans or Calvin Klein's, our bodies started to become poster boards for brands, and we said, and they said, oh, you want to wear our brands, you gotta fit your body to fit our brands, because we're not gonna make our brands to fit you.
No, that would be cheap.
Right? And so there's that, and then there's the whole idea of like reclaiming ethnic identity, like for Black women, like wearing natural hair and wearing like braided styles and wearing these particular patterns of clothing. And like for you were talking like for Middle Eastern women in like places like Iran where plastic surgery is used in a political context, where for these women they're like, you want to control how we dress, well, I'm going to control what I look like under
yeah, exactly,
right? And so like they're saying, okay, and it has a very different context that for here.
Definitely.
Here, getting the plastic surgery is more about conforming and fitting particular ideals, and things that are told to us on TV and in films and in like reality TV shows now. You see all these women getting so much plastic surgery, and then of course you're gonna talk about like the Kardashians and stuff, and like people like bodies become a trend.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
like the BBL was a trend, like, and then like it just suddenly changed because like all of these celebrities started to go away from it, so then people stopped going away from it. So it's like interesting how like things like plastic surgery and beauty standards are political everywhere, but the context for the politics is different depending on where you are.
More, absolutely. And like I think like the pressure behind them, like, you know, like I don't necessarily think like you know, like the like it is like, you know, like it's not exactly ideal either way if at the end of the day like people feel that there is a right body type or like a right, like, you know, like physical kind of feature, and then feel that a means of obtaining that is if they are able to like just like put down the money or purchase it or in such a way. And I think like exactly as you said, I think unfortunately a lot of that is projected onto like, you know, like women in the West especially at very young ages. And like as I was trying to explore, like hopefully was able to like communicate with like the character of like Layla and Unibrow is something that just like completely then takes over her like actual like her experience and her like, you know, like confidence and her ability to kind of like walk out into the world, and has a very negative sort of emphasis on her relationship with her Iranian culture.
Exactly, because like we were saying at the beginning, it's like just her eyebrows, and it's just such a simple
It's so simple,
you know, something that we all have. And like one of the reasons like I think the unibrow is such a intrinsic part of Iranian beauty culture is because like it has to do with genetics, because like for like Iranian people and a lot of people from the Middle East and depending on which other countries, like the hair here just grows more than other people. So like they're like, oh, we're gonna just fully embrace this and just make this a part of our cultural identity. But then like for her, she's going to a private school in Canada, and she has people who are, and this is something I always talk about, where Canada has this extremely, well, not anymore, not with the war in Palestine, but had this persona, this very carefully crafted messaging of being a place of tolerance and acceptance of people from everywhere, of immigrants. And then you go to school, you go to work, and you realize, yeah, no, that's a lie. And like even some places like this high school where the girls, like she's the only person of color in her class and she's Iranian, and they call her unibrow in a derogatory way, you know. And it's like you have people who are telling you the thing that makes that to you and to your people makes you beautiful and makes you special is looked at derogatively here, you know, by these white people. Even at home she's not comfortable, you know. Even at home she's still thinking with a colonial mindset that has been taught to her, like you have to like to speak English means that you're assimilated, that you're better, you know, and that in speaking to if you speak in Farsi to your grandparents or to your mother, you're somehow less than, you know. Like she's made nervous about that. So talk to me about that, because like language itself is something I think that is so important to us and to our identities. Like for me, I speak in my dialect and my accent at home and around other Caribbean people. One of the reasons I really speak in my accent and dialect outside of people who are from the Caribbean is because people really wouldn't understand me, because I speak so fast and my dialect is so different. But I speak more in it. I've been letting it leak out more, and like even in interviews and in other like language discussions with other people, and when I'm like tweeting, which I do a lot, I tweet in like my dialect and stuff. But like language is hidden in, like, again, you can say you're broad because it's external, but language is hidden until we actually speak. You know, like that's the thing. Like once we start speaking, that's where language becomes evident.
No, absolutely. And language is also like something that is like, it is political, as you said, because it is a direct kind of like representation of so much like context and so much like upbringing, and the legacy of like you know, like speak like for many languages, but like, you know, like Farsi is especially like, this is like a language that has been honed and like originated over like thousands of years, and like, you know, like has very like sort of like long-term roots that like go on like forever, honestly, like, you know, like and so it's I think like with any language, for me, the ability, the fact when it is able to be like passed on, and when future generations are able to like speak it, like that itself feels like such like a miracle. Like it's like, you know, like so many of us are like the legacies of like many diaspora communities, like over time, like just like continuing to like, you know, pass this on and like survive it. And I think like, especially like, I'm sure you would like, you know, like resonate with this, like there's only so much that can get, I think, like communicated with translation. Like there's so many little nuances, there's so many words for and ways of like expressing like love and connection in Farsi that just honestly doesn't really exist in English. And I like to think that that's maybe because Farsi is just so much of an older language.
I think that's actually standard in a lot of other languages, where like the languages are so complex, you know.
Very complex.
And like there's so many different ways of speaking, and I think that's because of like the inclusion of so many different subcultures and tribes, you know, and ethnic identities. The languages and taking all of that, where English itself is a complex language because English is amalgamation of like literally almost every language on earth. Like that's where people are like, oh, speak English. I'm like, the word you just said is French.
It's so like, no, that's exactly it though. So, there's so many pluralities to like every, like even like when we say English, like there's so many different ways of like being able to,
which is like come from Normandy. Like it's a
very specific dialect that I think we like just like, you know, like normalize and like you know, like hold above the others. But I think that like, you know, like in the case of like Unibrow, I'm second generation, and so even me, like, you know, like I speak Farsi at home a lot, and I was able to like really retain it because I not only had my parents in my life speaking Farsi, but I also had my grandparents, and in order to like kind of like build a relationship with them, I need to be able to speak Farsi. But I still don't know so much like about the language, and there's still so much like, you know, like when I speak, like there's like evidence of like my accent, and like, you know, like there's a lot that like I have to really overthink and like think about. And so I think some of that is also like Layla's own like hesitancy in being able to speak Farsi. Like she feels really uncomfortable, and she's somebody, like when we meet her at the beginning of the film, she is like uncomfortable in her own skin, period. Like and she and so like, you know, like in many ways, like speaking Farsi for her is a very vulnerable act. It'll force her to have to like, you know, face the fact that she is like a second generation person, and so maybe doesn't feel as fluent in the language as she otherwise should, as she otherwise feels that she should be. It'll face the fact that like she is in Canada and is like very like, you know, like distant from like her own like kind of like communication. Like I think like immigration itself is always in some way or another a form of trauma. Like
it is,
and it's really like it's hard to contend with that. Even the generation after that has to like kind of like contend with that. And so I think that like a lot of what I was trying to really like build around the character of Layla, especially at the beginning, was that there's this girl who constantly has to navigate and choose between a culture at home and a culture outside, and never fully feels that she fits into either one, and is in many ways, especially at the beginning, just trying to reject that choice. And I have a lot of empathy for that. I think it makes sense to me that people would feel that way.
Yeah, because she's trying to choose the easier path. She's trying to choose the path path of least resistance, you'd say.
The less hurtful one.
But then the problem with that is that in doing that, you end up choosing the path that takes you away from who you are intrinsically.
You'll pay in the long run.
Exactly. You'll pay in the long run, and you're like, why does moving away from who we are, from our cultural identity, our ethnicity, our heritage, our history, and all the complications that come with that have to be the easier choice?
That's exactly it.
Why can't moving away from conforming to North American white stereotypical identity be it should be easier. It should be like, it should be easier to say, you know what, I don't want to be like Jenny. You know, I don't want to be like Karen. I don't want to be like Bob. You know, I don't want to be like Kevin. I want to be like my family. You know, that should be easier because these are the people that you identify with. But society says no, conform, assimilate. That's why I'm always very careful about the distinction between assimilation and integration. Because to me, integration is existing within the new community, but existing within the space, but not forgetting who you are and like taking all the things that you brought with you and making that a part. It's like a puzzle. To me, integration is like making everything work as a puzzle, whereas assimilation is like becoming so fully enmeshed in it that you do away with everything that has to do with who you are. You know, assimilation is like taking on the identity of the new thing that you're in, the new space that you're in, and like disposing of everything that came before, you know. So I always like to say, like, I think for people, I always stress, like, to me, the importance of integration more than assimilation. And I think, and like Layla as a character, she kind of has that kind of she has a dilemma, but I think it's interesting that her dilemma becomes a bit more clear for her when she meets the new character of Sahar, the new student who's also from Iran. And Sahar is interesting. First, I gotta ask, is her name kind of like a meta reference to your last name?
It's not. Sahar is like a very it's a really beautiful Persian name.
Yeah.
But no.
I was like, is this like a reference to her name? But Sahar, she comes in and like in the classroom, you know, and they always, if you have a new student and like the teacher asks, is there anyone here who speaks Persian? And like Layla doesn't put her hand up, and I was like, well, that kind of makes sense because technically Farsi isn't Persian, because in Iran they speak Arabic, Persian, and Farsi, and those are like three completely different languages.
Oh no, Persian is the like English word for Farsi.
Is it?
Yeah.
You know, I always thought it was something separate.
No, it's not. It's not. Okay. So that was also like, I guess, like a play. Like the teacher's not going to call it Farsi.
He's going to call it Persian. Oh, okay. Because like Bami Barbados, we always say we refer to as Farsi. So I've always grown knowing
Yeah.
So in my head, I always thought Persian was a separate language.
No, it's not.
Okay, so there's something new every day. But okay, so the teacher is like saying that she doesn't put her hand in because she doesn't want to draw more attention to her. And again, like the girls in the classroom, the white girls are like, oh, another unibrow. I was just like, and the teacher like, white people, and the teacher's like, oh, girls, I was hoping you wouldn't say something like that. And I'm like, first of all, that's all you're gonna say, but that's expected because that's what they do. They don't really step in because a lot of teachers, they reinforce the racism and the bigotry, you know, because they for them, not confronting it and not calling out what it is, kind of like is they themselves refusing to admit they themselves have the biases. But by not correcting the students, they reinforce it and perpetuate it, you know, and make it harder for the students like Layla and Sahar to exist in these schools. You know, they make their school experience even more difficult than it needs to be.
Absolutely. No, I think that was like very, I think, a universal experience for a lot of like a lot of folks. Like you deal with like microaggressions and like oppressive behaviors both from your peers and also from like the institution, like teachers, principals. I like myself have like been in like schools where like you know, like if students were like telling people like you need to speak English here, if they were speaking another language, you would like go to like, you know, like a teacher or principal to complain. They would be like, well, that's what I told them too. And you're like, oh my gosh. Where do you begin?
This is why things aren't getting better.
No, genuinely, I think that's literally it. Like I think there's like a real fundamental like illiteracy around like anti-racism and anti-oppression. And I, you know, like I guess like one thing I will say is that I grew up in like around the time I was like Layla and Sahar's age would have been like in like the or like sort of like closer to like 2008, 2009 kind of like era. And that like at that time, I think the schools that I went to were more like, you know, like kind of like predominantly white spaces, or like there were just like less Iranis. But nowadays in like North York and like Richmond Hill, that's really not the case. And I think that like that also like was like something that like I was trying to like I'm always kind of curious about, and like sort of like, you know, like would be curious to like see like I think like a lot now in a lot of like those like neighborhoods there is just like so much more representation and a lot more kind of like, for lack of a better word, like multiculturalism. And the result of that is like kind of like more of like a normalization of a lot of like experiences. I'm not saying that to say that it's like perfect or like racism is gone, like the very like opposite, but I think that like that itself, like I think like a lot of like, you know, like what I was missing was other Iranis in the room, or like other folks who kind of like didn't need to make a big deal around like a non-Western name. And that was such a novel concept when I was growing up. But I like to think nowadays that like, especially in those like neighborhoods, it's something that's like increasingly becoming not as like, I guess like pointed as an experience, because there are so many folks who also embody like ethnic names and who are now becoming teachers and who are now becoming like going into like, you know, like those positions.
And the thing is like, because when I moved here, I went to an adult high school. So I moved here as an adult. So I went to an adult high school because I was not told that if you wanted to do college here, if you have been outside of tertiary education for more than 5 years, you basically have to start from scratch. So I went to an adult high school, and I went to college. It was an adult high school, and then I went to college, but I went to school with people from literally all over the world. And that's where you do see like Canada is a truly multicultural place. And like one of the most overwhelming experiences for me when I first moved here is getting on the train and the TTC bus and hearing all of these different accents and dialects, you know, because coming from Barbados, even the people who were from like other countries, like who were Muslim and Hindu, who came from like India and Pakistan and India and Iran and all these other countries, if they were born there, they had a Bajan accent, you know. So you see someone whose family is like Iranian, but then you go to school and they still got a Bajan accent, you know. So like, but coming here, it was a bit overwhelming hearing all the different accents and the dialects. But I grew to love it. I love hearing all of the different accents and the dialects. And like when again Canada and Toronto say like we're the multicultural capital of the world, you know, and then it's like there's beauty in that. But then they still expect you to fit into their ID and their idea and their concept of beauty and being civilized and being accepted into what being a Torontonian is, you know, this used to what being a Canadian is. And like I made a note on my phone and my thing, I was like fitting in. I'm like, why is it even so important, you know? And because in nature, the things that we observe and the things that we value in nature, and even in films, is the things that stand out. You know, when a film stands out, you're like, this film catches me because it's not like every other film made, you know?
Sure, yeah.
You go outside, you go to a park, you see a flower, and it's like the flower that stands out, the beauty, the colors that catches your eye. We look at animals and like birds, like mallard ducks and stuff, like they catch our eye because they're so different, and we value that. And I'm like, why is it so hard to do it for people?
I know, yeah, like, definitely.
And so like the film made me really think of that. I'm like, why do we say we value beauty and like uniqueness and like standing out and like peacocks and all these things, but why can't we value that in other human beings, you know?
No, genuinely, I know. Yeah, I think like that's something that like in Canadian, like sort of like the I guess like definition of like multiculturalism that is like really like portrayed over here is like one that like fundamentally centers whiteness. And I guess I really am like of the belief that like if you want to to really get like the full experience of living somewhere like Toronto or like in like the greater Toronto area, in appreciating like the multiculturalism and like the different sort of like communities that are here, we also have a lot of work to do, and we also owe not just a responsibility but like an accountability in being able to recognize the oppression that like premeditated a lot of like the communities that like kind of like immigrated here and like came here, but also the like oppression and experiences of racism that those communities felt upon and continue to feel upon like coming here. And I think like in like for me like the denial of one is like the just pays disrespect to the other. Yeah. I don't know of a world in which like I in my experience that like it's always sort of like it's always a misnomer to think that you can talk about one without talking about the other.
Yeah, and I think the character Sahar kind of does that, and one of the reasons she does that is because she immigrates not as a child or she was born there, but she immigrates as a teenager, so she already has her identity, or you know, she's already at that age where she's like, I know who I want to be, I know who I am, you know. She's already had the acceptance of the different beauty standards in Iran instilled in her, you know. She already has that assuredness, and Like, and so I thought it was interesting that you have a character like that, because again, like for second gen and third gen immigrant children, they grow up in the new environment. You know, they grow up in Canada, whereas like for someone like Sarshar, she grew up back home in Iran, so she has the Iranian identity, and so she's able to show Leia that there's nothing to be ashamed of, you know. And like for like Leia, she's an artist, a fantastic artist, and she's drawing all these different faces, and Sarhar's like, oh, so many eyebrows, you know. And then she knows that none of the eyebrows have like unibrows, you know. And like Leila's like, oh yeah, you know, I'm just drawing these things, but Sarshar is intuitive enough to immediately pick up like, oh, this girl has issues.
Insecurities.
So to talk to me about Sarshar and like having her be making her a character that is so self-assured, even as a teenager the same age as Leia.
I think like really like in building out like the character of Sarshar, like I really was trying to capture what my experience has been in meeting young women who kind of are more recently have come over from Iran, but also like, you know, like sort of like currently live there, and in many ways so many of them are I think every woman is, but like so many of them are very active members of like the woman life freedom movement currently happening in Iran. And like I think like these are honestly like, you know, like young girls and young people whose bravery, like, you know, like on kind of like a consistent basis just floors, I think, like that me, and I like, you know, like very much like humbles, like, you know, like someone like myself who kind of like grew up in the diaspora and who has like and who like, you know, like feels very like who just has nothing but like the respect and yeah, like awe for, I think, like a lot of like the resistance fighters and like and movement builders who are there, and so I think like and you know, like a lot of like my growing up, like, you know, like second gen, like it was well in adulthood, like really well in my 20s, that I started really like having more of like a nuanced take on my Iranian heritage, and that largely came from like looking at other Irani women and seeing how they kind of like I think like embodied their identity and their sort of like, you know, like takes on like the feminism and intersectionality and that like really like stayed with me. And so like in building out like this character of Sarshar, like what I really like, I think like, you know, like Leila feels very insecure, and she feels that like somebody like Sarshar should feel all that more insecure. Like if Leila's in trouble, Sahar's in way bigger trouble, like, you know, like for having recently come over, having like, you know, like an accent, like not being able to speak English like very well, like, you know, like and also like not being able to hide her Iraniness in so many ways. And instead, like Sahar's not like that, like, you know, like she's not insecure, she's very like comfortable with who she is. She has like a far bigger kind of like, I think like she has a bigger world than Leila, and I think like that is something in myself kind of like growing up in the West, in many ways I think like we were raised to kind of like think that we're like the lucky ones that like got out, and I like that's not to like diminish a lot of the privileges I think like that came with like living and being raised in like a country like Canada versus like in Iran, but at the same time I think that like the reality is that in many ways I think like just like sort of like accepting that on face value diminishes the richness and the experience of so many people who weren't necessarily like, you know, like raised here, or like, you know, like whose life sort of didn't unfold in like specific ways, and I think like that's very fundamental for Leila's experience to understand that.
Yeah, and it's true, because the thing that, and it's not just only like North America, but like Caribbeans or wherever you're from, like, but particularly North American, particularly the whole idea that living in North America makes you, as you said, luckier than everyone else, you know, like you're living in an advanced culture, everyone wants to come to America, everyone comes to Canada, but then when you immigrate, they still look down on you. But then I always, one of the reasons I love filmmaking, I love doing what I do, is especially when I talk to filmmakers from around the world, I'm always, I always wonder if I'm being too pushy, but one of the reasons I prefer to do it is like I always talk about being an immigrant because I take on the identity of calling myself an immigrant because I always say as an acknowledgement of the fact that I am from Barbados. I came from another country, and like, as you mentioned, being an immigrant is a very traumatic experience. Like immigrating to a completely different country is a very traumatic experience. Like emotionally, and even physically, because even my hair changed, my hair texture and everything changed with the water here. But it's like so different. But I went through so much things, and then like I was able to building a whole new life from scratch is extremely difficult,
So difficult.
Looking for a job, like having going to school, building, like I live with my twin sister, and like buying furniture and all the responsibility that comes with that. Like that is so hard when you're doing it in a country that is not your own, where you have friends and family who are here, but it's not the familial support system that you have where you're in your home country. But then I'm always telling people, but there's nothing wrong with being an immigrant, not only looking at it racially but culturally, because you're coming from, you get to experience a whole other culture, you get to experience a whole other country.
It's a privilege in itself.
You're experiencing the world from different days and different perspectives, and you're like we have all of these restaurants from countries all over, but like you get to eat the food in the country where it came from. Like you get to learn the history of the food, and like there's so much that comes with that. And something I'm always trying to tell people, especially filmmakers, and other filmmakers always want to be like, oh, I want to make it in Hollywood. I'm always like, Hollywood is not that great. North America is not that great. It's struggling, but it's also like embrace your own culture and your own identity. Like it's beautiful. Like when you travel, like they're like. Embrace that, because there's a beauty in having to say I experienced this entirely different country.
Yes.
And like you speak different languages, and it's something that people talk about where they say, oh, speak English, you're in Canada, whatever. Again, as I said, Canada does not have an official language. Montreal has French, but isn't it like a ghetto French? But like
we're just but
for everyone. But listen, I don't hold back. But the thing is like, you're multicultural, you get to speak a whole different language, like your brain is firing on a completely different plane than people who only speak English, like even like speaking a completely different accent and dialect is a version of a language itself. I always say like speaking Bajan like dialect is like a whole different language because it operates completely differently, and like that's something to embrace. That makes you unique, that makes you who you are. And that's again like if we can look at flowers and say that everyone can appreciate the beauty of a flower, appreciate the beauty of being able to speak a completely different language.
I totally I think that would like that's ideal. But I think that like also like there are so many like the reality is that there's so many barriers, and there is like often there's like social capital that is denied when you're not able to conform in such like intense ways. So like as you said, like a unibrow, for example, is like this like really like small whatever thing, like it's hair, like but it's also so much more than that. It reflects kind of like I think like a reality that is not being awarded in certain spaces, and I think that like so much of like what we talked about like before, like I think like when you sort of like when you come to like a country like Canada, or like when you come to like a space like Toronto, like in sort of like you're faced with this image of like so much multiculturalism, which is beautiful and important and really really like eye-opening and worldly, and at the same time with that is a great deal of pressure and a great deal of I think like just messaging that comes with like needing to kind of like fit into like a specific kind of identity, and I think and I completely like I think like a lot of people have told me that like what resonated with them around like Unibrow was that like it was very like telling like they really could recognize that like coming of age sort of battle that so many of us have had to kind of like deal with, and I really like for me it was very important to lean into that and to like try to like portray that conflict as authentically as possible.
And I think we succeeded because it would resonate not only with young girls but also women, you know, like, because as we said at the beginning, like, there's so much of society telling us about how we're supposed to look, you know, like commercials advertising like hair removal products, you know, like deodorants and all of these different things, and it's like, what are we supposed to choose? You know, like, it's such a hard choice just even choosing what hair removal product you're going to use, you know, what method of taming your eyebrows you're going to use, and there's like so many different things about how to do our hair and so many advertisements about different products to do our hair, and it's like there's such a like, and even those things kind of have a political choice in them, you know, like, and like our bodies is like, it's a battlefield, you know.
It is definitely a battlefield. No, it absolutely is. It 100% is. And I think that like, you know, like, I mean, like, it's something that like at least like in my like personal like experience, like a lot of like the pressure to like I think like conform to like, you know, like I guess like a more kind of like white Canadian like standard was one that was felt very intensely in school, but also one that did come from in the home. Like, you know, like I think like it shouldn't be lost on people that like at the end of the day, like Layla is going to this like private school and is not being surrounded by like, you know, like Iranian people. Like, yeah, like her mom puts pressure on her to like, you know, like speak Farsi and like whatnot. But I think like I think like in many ways it's sort of like a surface level request. Like, you know, like it's not really something that like necessarily is like being built up and like being like, you know, like saturated amongst her. And that's because like she as like a mom and like, you know, like the family wants their like child to have like the world, like, you know, like wants their child to have like an easy life, and in so many ways they are being told and she is being told that an easy life is one that has her fitting into white Canada. Yeah,
and that's the thing, like when you're immigrating you don't think about these things.
You can't
until you're actually in it. Like once I actually moved to Canada and I started looking for a job and all these things, I realized that what I had thought about immigrating, and I didn't even think about what I was doing as the act of immigrating itself. I was just, I'm just moving. And you know, like that's what we say, like back when we brought my sister, oh, you moving away, you know, and like you move into a different country, but we don't really actually label it as immigrating. I only really started to think of it as immigrating actually when I was in school to be a paralegal, and we were doing the module for international law and immigration and international immigration law and that kind of stuff. Then I really started to really think about, oh, okay, I'm an immigrant, and like I really had to sit down and really think about like how will I identify myself, because I know there are people who don't really think of themselves as immigrants, especially if they've been living here for like 20, 30, 40 years. But like for me, I had to really think about like what does being an immigrant mean for me, and like why do I want to refer to myself as an immigrant. But like but then even like the film, like it doesn't really say explicitly, but the film does talk about the immigrant experience is very different for adults than it is for children.
Oh, totally.
You know, because like for adults, adults have a completely different set of responsibilities than children. You know, for children, it's going to school and doing all of these things. You get around everything. For parents, it's about learning to survive and coming from whatever trauma that they have, you know, and trying not to make sure they don't put that trauma on their kids, and trying to get their kids to assimilate and to fit into the society, but then also like whatever struggles they're facing at work, you know, or whatever situations they're dealing with. So like the film doesn't explain it, but like if you really understand what I call the immigrant experience, you really like your film really does touch on like how these things are, the priorities for adults are very different for children and teenagers, you know.
Totally.
And the things and the connections are different. Like for the grandma, she starts talking about Isfahan, which is a region in Iran, and like for her, like Iran again has a very different context than it does for Layla, you know. For her, she has the memory of Isfahan. She has all of these beautiful memories and all these things, but she can teach Layla about them, but Layla can't experience them. You know, so I think the film does a really brilliant job of like really adding in all these layers and these different topics that you can really get into.
Thank you. I'm really glad. But yeah, I think like for me it was like like I thought of the film as always like kind of like a slice of life of like what it's like growing up like second gen in like the diaspora, and like in the morning you hate your unibrow and you want like, and you're committed to like erasing all parts of like your identity, and by the end of the day you are like her last words are like, I will go to Esfahan, like, or I will go like see like the Esfahan, and so it's like it's a full like kind of like 180, but in many ways like at least like that to me is like such like a quintessential like diaspora experience. It's like this constant sort of like back and forth, and I think that like, you know, like it is a genuine struggle to not have like, you know, like that like groundedness, but like as sort of like an adult, or like, you know, like in being able to kind of like look back on it, I can realize that like that back and forth like shaped me, and so many other people, like that is the experience that like, you know, like not being able to like sit still in one area one way or another, and having to constantly go like navigate like back and forth.
Yeah, it can be emotionally exhausting, but it does build you into who you are, and it helps you to see the world completely differently to everyone else. Like, as you were just saying, it kind of made me think of like one of the reasons Leia would have been more in tune with Sahar and be able to listen to what Sahar is saying, like talking about the eyebrows, because Sahar tells her about the plastic surgery and like how women in Iran use it as a way to reclaim their identity. Like, Sahar shows her a way to accept her Iranian identity through the eyebrows in a way that works for Layla. You know, like for instance, she teaches her the threading. She's like, you can have your thick eyebrows, let's just like make it a bit more tidy, you know. And she does it in a way she's not telling Layla that she's wrong for this, like, for like being having like this like of her unibrow, because she understands that Layla is struggling. But she's like, okay, let me show you a way to do this where you can still use like Iranian culture, like the threading, and still in a way fit in a way. Exactly. You know, she's like you're fitting in, but you're doing it on your terms and in a way that you don't have to dismiss your heritage. And I think that's something that even as adults that is still a learning process for all of us, and it's like you still have to figure out a way to do things that still work for you. Like, okay, this works, but I'm not dismissing who I am, and I'm not dismissing my culture and my people.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, as I said, like, you know, like I think it's a gift when somebody is able to show you that, and I think that like that's something that like I wish for like every like kind of like lonely diaspora kid, like, you know, like
yeah, you're like here, I'm using these Western techniques to make films, and I'm still doing it as a way to talk about my culture and my heritage.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm using the tools. I'm using these tools to still like honor my people and to teach people like embrace your unibrow. And if you don't want to embrace your unibrow in a way that still works for you without dismissing who you are, you know, like make your unibrow work for you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the important thing. So for like, we're gonna wrap it up. So something something else I wanted to ask you about. And I noticed it in the beginning of the film, and it was something I had read in an essay, like to prep for this interview, and it was the inclusion of Iranian art. And like I was looking at some pictures, and so like Iranian art really does feature a lot of images of women, and like the unibrow and like all of that. So just talk to me a bit about inserting, because the film starts that way. The film starts with showing these like they're kind of like mosaics, clay mosaics, and like their artwork of Iranian artwork, and it kind of shows how, again, what I was talking about, like accepting beauty and art and all these things that are accepted as being exceptional. But I like how you start the film out there. You're already kind of telegraphing like what the unibrow is to Iranian culture. Like, it's such a part of our culture that it's even in our artwork.
Yeah.
So we'll finish here. I want to ask you about using that at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, 100%. So all those like pictures that came at the beginning of the film are actually paintings that are from my grandmother's house. And so like I like recognize like intimately, and like, you know, like are have been part like such a like just like, you know, like prominent like space for like me growing up. And so I really I brought those in because I was just like, okay, here's Unibrow, let's and all the images are women from the and paintings depicting women from the Qajar dynasty in Iran, who all kind of whose I guess form of beauty and was very prominent unibrows. And I really I wanted to showcase them at the beginning. One, as you said, to make it clear the significance of the unibrow and Iranian culture and history, but also as sort of a kind of depiction of here's the character of this girl who's trying to get rid of this unibrow, but her legacy and her history are women with very prominent unibrows, and she herself is growing up in a house where these images are depicted, and the kind of to me at least the sadness of that situation, that is sad, the fact that this girl wants to erase this, but it's also, I think it's sad and it's funny. Because it's so silly, it is it's what are you doing, what's going on? And I think that silliness is just honestly a very universal awkward preteen sort of experience that everybody kind of has to go through, where in many ways I do kind of want to start from scratch, and so those images at the very beginning are actually images that I grew up with, quite literally they are back home in my grandmother's apartment right now. And I think there are images that I think a lot of young Iranian people would recognize as existing in their own homes, and I think very much reflective of a lot of the immigrant experience. You constantly go back and forth between wanting to erase your heritage and also having it front and center in your life.
Okay, I said that was gonna be the last question, but I realized I did forget to ask about one thing. So about the actresses that play Layla and Sahar. Talk to me a bit about them. I thought I wrote their names down. Did I not?
No, that's okay.
So talk to me about casting them.
Yeah. So it was it was tricky. It took a lot of it was a lot of prep to be able to find these two, and specifically because Unibrow so much of the dialogue is in Farsi. I couldn't it wasn't I could I mean, I don't believe this fun as a filmmaker and as an artist. I don't believe in I think when you can, you always should like find somebody who like is representative of like the character's like background and like in kind of like the acting role. But like because like like the characters have to speak Farsi, and they have to speak Farsi in different ways. Like the character of Layla has to be able to speak Farsi with kind of like a more like Western accent, right. And the character of Sahar has to be clear that she's like very fluent in Farsi. Like she is from Iran, like like and grew up like speaking Farsi in a way like that's her first language as opposed to Layla. And that was a bit of a tricky situation to be in because like like that there's like it's quite a small pool of people to be able to like pick out, and so it was like weeks of like like auditions and trying to like like find people and trying to like figure things out, and also like the character of Layla, especially like the bolder the eyebrows, the better. And that there were things that like I think like we were prepared to do in kind of like the makeup room and whatnot, but it was like through like like consistent looking that like one day my producer sends me a picture of Lena Senya, who ended up playing Layla. And I was like, okay. And then I had one look at those gorgeous brows and was like, all right, now we're getting somewhere. And like Lena is like a very young person as well, so like very perfect for the age. And when we auditioned her, she just was the most. She's an incredible actress, like as you saw, I think like like those who know her know that like how good of an actress she is, because she's so the opposite of the character of Layla. She's this like like fast talking, enthusiastic, really like like vocal and just charismatic like young person, and really doesn't carry, at least like like out from the outside, like a lot of like the insecurities and like the quietness that like is so like trademark for the character of Layla, but could embody that role and could really understand that character so well. And so that like really like like immediately was like, okay, there we go.
Right.
The character of Sahar was tricky because now we have to look at folks who more recently came over. And that was also a lot of, not only a lot of like auditioning to find like the right person who would be able to play the role properly, but also unfortunately like a lot of folks don't have permanent residency.
Right.
And this was going to be an ACTRA union kind of production, so everybody needed to have either a permanent residency or be a Canadian citizen. And that was unfortunate because as a result of that we had to turn, I had an even more limited pool to be able to look at, and was unfortunately, like in my opinion, is quite a barrier to a lot of like newcomers being able to like, you know, find roles and be able to like, you know, like play like more like prominence. Like,
and Iran has a pretty solid, I think, film industry and film
huge.
Culture,
Oh, geez, like no, like massive. Like, you know, like the Iranian film industry is like it's like I stand on like the shoulder of giants. Like, but like I think that like so like, you know, like like you have such talent, and in many cases like the paperwork is just unfortunately not there. But and it was really through word of mouth and community connections of just like talking with like, you know, like other members and like having people of the community and having people referred that Parastu Amanzadeh ended up auditioning, and she swept. Like she like, you know, like she just like really came in with like this like understanding of the character, this ability to just like really be able to like add so much more depth to like the character of Sahar. And I really had to lean on Parastu a lot because I really understood the character of Layla intimately, because I'm second generation. I know exactly how she's going to think. I know her dynamic with her mother, I know her dynamic with her grandmother and how that's different, and so many other like, you know, like pieces I was able to kind of like fill in and support with the playing of that character. But with Sahar, I really like, this was very much a stranger to me. I like, this was like somebody who like I had like built up, but like I didn't necessarily understand. And so in so many ways, like the actual like result of the character of Sahar is Parastu really being able to like fill in those pieces. And we had lots of conversations about like what I was envisioning, and she would like, you know, like push back or like talk about like how it might make better sense in a different way and whatnot. And like one of the most like rich and rich experiences that I'm so grateful for from like this whole thing was that in the middle, like in set, especially in like the bedroom scene, there were so many moments where I began to like really feel that the two of them, both Lena and Parastu, understood their characters better than I did, because the decisions that they made and the choices that they would make would just be would have such better results than anything that I could like be able to tell them. And at that moment I was like, wow, we did it.
Yeah, you did. The scene in the bedroom in particular is very good because it's like, again, like we talked earlier about like the salons and, you know, the spaces where women and young girls, like people think, oh, like you're just doing here, like girls and women don't really talk about anything deep. But it's just like how the barbershop is a place to discuss politics, so is a salon, and so is the bedroom where you get ready for a party, or even in this case where Sahar is threading her eyebrows. Like, again, she's talking about the politics that women in Iran go through, you know, talking about body positivity and like the politics of like showing their and like doing the plastic surgery and like covering themselves, and like the movement where the women were cutting their hair and like in protest, and like so like they have these discussions in the bedroom and they're doing this, and it's in the bedroom that Layla in talking with Sahar really realizes that she needs to really think about how she sees herself, you know, and like how she's drawing all these pictures of white people and people like features that aren't like her, and then she really starts to reflect. And like they really the scene in the bedroom is really, I think they did a fantastic job, and like that's where the apex of the arc of like Layla's story begins, you know, like she starts here and the apex is the bedroom scene, and then that's where she starts to make her transition, you know, and
it's a real transformation.
So it's fitting that it happens in the bedroom, you know. It's like the bedroom is like our most intimate space, you know. It's the place where we feel the most comfortable, where we can fully let our guards down to fall asleep and to get ready and see ourselves when we're dressing in the mirror and everything. So I love that it happens there, and I love that they both like like you said, the decisions they both make, and like that's the scene where you really start to think, like Sahar really understands Layla in a way that even her grandmother and her mother may not understand.
No, and she not only understands, she cares enough for Layla. She I think really builds, this is Sahar's bedroom, and it's a new bedroom. In so many ways, it's also a very uncomfortable space for Sahar, because this is a new bedroom that she has just moved into. That's why we see all those boxes over there and whatnot, and so many remnants of the life that she has had to leave behind. And her heart is big enough that she is able to open her door to this complete stranger and be able to carry out this ritual that at the end of the day I think really originates from a place of love and community, and it's really only in that space that Layla is able to change, and her world is ultimately able to get bigger. And I think as you said, it really it becomes the apex of the whole film. And we wouldn't have been able to have that sort of climax and payoff without actors who really understood these roles, and who were able to really donate their talents in such lovely ways.
Yeah, they both did a fantastic job, and congrats to them.
Thank you, and the crew, and
everyone involved in making the film. Congrats and to the actresses who played the mom and the grandma.
Yeah,
they were great as
well. Also lovely people.
They were great as well. Thank you so much, Nedda, for taking the time to talk to me about the film. I wish we had more time.
I know.
Thank you so much, and congrats to you on the film. And is there a way that people will be able to watch the film online?
Well, not online yet. If you happen to be in the air with an Air Canada flight, you can watch it.
Will be available online.
It is on Air Canada right now, and will be for the more few months. And I really thank you so much to ShortShorts for the platform and the opportunity to connect with you and be able to speak with you. And thank you so much to the Toronto International Reelation Film Festival, that without whom this film would not be able to exist.
Right, because you read the can you pitch contest?
So you think you can pitch contest?
Right, so I was thinking that was it has something to do with a TV show, but so you think you can so you think you can pitch, and I do cover the Toronto Asian Festival. So when it was I was wait a minute. And then I looked back and said, oh, wait, yeah, you read the pitch contest for the year before. So, yeah, but congrats to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that is it, everyone. Say bye. Bye.